So here's something a bit unexpected. This is footage from the closed beta of Crown Trick, an upcoming game that should be hopefully available fairly soon, and there is currently a closed beta going on of which I'll give you a little bit more detail in a second. When I first was aware of this game's existence, just looking at the screenshots and things, I figured that it was going to be like a sort of a roguelite RPG dungeon crawler, like Gungeon or Isaac or something like that. And I enjoyed those games very much, so I decided I would definitely give it a try. However, it's actually more like a traditional roguelike than anything else, with even down to the traditional roguelike movement, where the entire world is tile-based. You move one tile at a time, and it has a simultaneous turn-based system like all roguelikes do, where as soon as you take a turn, the entire world around you also gets a turn at the same time. So that was unexpected. I didn't think it was actually going to be that sort of classical roguelike, so it's actually more like a roguelike with modern amenities like Dungeons of Dreadmore or Sword of the Stars: The Pit than anything else, which is kind of awesome. The game uses a lot of movement-based abilities and things because it seems as if positioning is one of the most important aspects of the game, that pretty much all of the mechanics come together to form a exploration and combat system that is based around positioning. You actually have a blink from the start of the game, although it has limited uses. They recharge every now and then, and also they recharge to full at the beginning of every room, as does your MP. So you have 3 charges, and you have to make sure to use them carefully, because there will be sometimes attacks put down that you won't be able to simply walk away from in time, because it'll give you, the classic red stuff on the ground that says don't stand here, and then a number inside of it that tells you how many turns it's going to be until that effect goes off. So you will find yourself blinking around the place quite often, and I actually really like that. I always go for like blinks and stuff in turn-based games that allow me to, so having one as a main part of the base gameplay that's available from the start, that's pretty cool. I'm a fan of that sort of thing, and yeah, definitely all of the mechanics come together to give you the idea that positioning is extremely important in this game. You've got the blink, you've got your movement. A lot of your active abilities that you can get also have some sort of movement effect to them. Either they will send you backwards a certain number of tiles, or they will push your enemies backwards a certain number of tiles, or allow you to move in certain directions a certain amount, stuff like that. A lot of them are based around movement. It becomes immediately obvious upon the first level in the closed beta that you will need to be strategically repositioning yourself at all times. And there are other bits of the combat also favor this. For instance, there's a break system. Enemies have kind of like a stamina or an armor kind of system where you hit them and it will decrease. They will get the turn as soon as you get your turn, so you'll be trading blows if you're not careful, and you obviously don't want to do that too much because you don't have infinite health. So as soon as you're able to get this number down to 0 by attacking them, they will stagger. They'll get stunned, they'll take increased damage, and you'll build up this combo meter. And the more combos you build up, you have 5 turns worth of time between breaks to keep the combo going, the more damage you'll do. So you can sort of jet around the room from enemy to enemy, breaking them all in sequence, and then using the big increased damage bonus to blink next to one of the tougher enemies in the room and do huge increased damage to them for a short time. So yeah, even the more basic mechanics of the combat system, it makes it very clear that tactical repositioning and stuff is at the very core of the experience, and I appreciate that because it means that even simple enemies that, non-named, non-boss enemies that you'll see all the time have all sorts of different attacks for you to learn, different like patterns on the ground and stuff that they can do that makes them all threatening. None of them are really fodder, so the whole idea that everyone can put all sorts of stuff on the ground, you've got other things that are already on the ground like traps, lava, mines, things like that, it makes the whole combat system and just the whole exploration idea focused on this movement mechanic above all other stuff, which is really nice. As for weapons, that's kind of interesting because every weapon has its own, fitting in with the movement mechanics, every weapon has its own swing or attack arcs. Things like big axes tend to hit all 8 squares around you in like a 360-degree radial attack, which is super useful, of course, but they're a bit slow. Things like spears and lances will hit the 2 tiles directly in front of you, and they will do extra damage to the farther tile than the closer one. Swords will hit the 3 tiles in front of you in like a horizontal line, like just a big slash that hits all 3 at once. So basically think like you're the T Tetris block, you're the little nub at the bottom, and the top 3 are where you swing. That's how those work. And the only, so far that I found at least, the only weapon that only hits a single point are the double daggers, but even they have a special sort of characteristic in that they actually attack twice instead of just once. So they only hit the one tile that you target, but they hit it twice, and they often have other status effects like poison tied to them. There are even guns that fire in like a 4 or 5 line straightforward shot. They tend to pierce enemies in that whole line, so they can do a lot of damage at range, but you do have to reload them every couple of shots. One of the other interesting central mechanics of the game is the familiar system. You'll notice that you have, at the bottom left of the screen there, 4 different active abilities to choose from. You have 2 familiar slots, and you can come across these crystals and choose a familiar from among them, and each familiar represents a creature that is often an actual mini-boss, sort of larger character that you can find and fight in the world. And each one has 2 abilities that they will give you, so that's how you get the 4 abilities. And each one is themed around a different thing. You have the weird chicken fencer thing that is kind of the, what's it called? The swashbuckler, I think, which is amazing. It's a chicken pirate, and it has a couple of abilities that focus on speed and movement. It has one ability that fires something forward and allows you to move backwards at the same time, and also a sort of flurry of quick attacks forward to squares. So, as I mentioned, even the active abilities that you get from these familiars are often based around movement as well, or at the very least have specific tile-based targeting systems that you have to position yourself to use correctly. And you do have a pretty limiting mana meter. It looks like a lot at first, but abilities tend to cost quite a bit. They're also cooldown based, so you can't just spam them, but your overall MP will refill to full at the beginning of every new chamber. So you're encouraged to use these abilities often to make your overall strategy work, hopefully, and the fact you can hold 4 at once is pretty nice. Right now in the closed beta there are only a couple, there are only like 5 different familiars to choose from, but each of them does have the full 2 ability suite with their own little themes each, and in the final game they have said that there's going to be a lot more than that, so that's pretty cool. I actually have a bit of an idea for this system, by the way, that I'm going to save for the end of the video. And lastly, you also have the traditional Rogue-lite Relics, all sorts of different passive abilities of various rarities that you can find and be awarded, all of them providing different buffs and statistical changes that you can use to hopefully align with your current build and make something powerful. You also have this potion that you can drink that actually works a bit like an Estus flask, to be honest. It only has a couple of drinks in it, but it restores about half of your HP and MP gauges all at once, and you can use it at any time. And the charges are replenished after each boss, so you have to go through an entire dungeon floor and a whole boss fight in order to get it back, so you have to use it carefully. And there are also, as you would probably expect, relics and items of the like that can actually increase the power of this regeneration from the flask. There are even things like this that you're seeing right now in the background that remind me of Slay the Spire's events a little bit. They are sort of multiple choice, almost choose your own adventure style events with different choices and consequences based on the things that you have, how much money you have, some relics you may have picked up, like the Philosopher's Stone can be used for one of them, for instance, and other things of that nature that give you some choice and some interesting variety in runs to try and experience new things, we'll say. Probably screw yourself over, because that's kind of half of the fun of games like this, to be honest. It also has a really nice art style, or at least an art style that I personally appreciate. It's got this sort of, it's based around essentially being in the world of nightmares, so it has this kind of dark fairy tale vibe to it, this like a hand-drawn, dark but whimsical thing that I've always liked when games do it. It's very like Alice in Wonderland, you could say, that sort of style. It's not like it's extremely rare or anything, I just really like it when it's done well, and this game does do it well, in my opinion. So overall, you have a pretty nicely polished roguelike adventure that actually uses a lot of traditional roguelike mechanics mixed in with some of the more modern amenities that you may be used to seeing in like dungeon crawling RPGs and the like, and create something that's really fun. I was not expecting it to be exactly like this. I didn't exactly know what it was going to be, but definitely not quite like this. I was pleased to see all of the mechanics all put together, forming a pretty classic feeling roguelike experience, but with some newer, like roguelite-y modern mechanics thrown in there too. And it's a really nice time, actually. If I had a suggestion, since it is in beta, anything that I would like to see, changed or added to, it would be the familiar system. Now, I obviously can't comment exactly on like the extent of the familiar system, since in the beta there are only a few of them, and there are going to be many more than that. But there is one thing that I would like to see, because the game has a rarity system for most of its loot. The rarities are actually very important to the mechanics. Your various relics all have different rarities, that denoted, of course, by different colors, with all sorts of various effects that you can find. And weapons also have rarities, and the rarities tend to affect their overall stats, as well as at higher rarities, weapons can have empty slots that in between boss fights and missions in the areas that allow you to refill your flask and stuff, you can actually forge new stats to put on these weapons in the empty slots if they're of a high enough rarity to have them. So the whole rarity thing is very much tied into the mechanics of the game in pretty much every other respect, but the familiars, the other like main aspect of the game's mechanics do not have rarities, which I found kind of interesting. It means that if you find a familiar, they're always the same. And I thought it would be kind of interesting if they could maybe do something to change around the way the familiars work a little bit. For instance, you could have maybe some familiars are more advanced and they have, instead of 2 skills to give, they may have, say, 4 or 5 different skills, but they'll only give 2 of those skills every time you find them, which means that every time you find that same familiar, it's not necessarily going to be exactly the same, thus giving you a little bit more variety to find. And the other idea would be to give sort of a rarity mechanic to the familiars as well, so that you could find, say, advanced or enchanted versions of the same familiars. So there's one that allows you to, it gives you like some earth elemental attacks. It gives you a dash forward that stuns an enemy and a sort of earthquake attack that makes earth damage radiate from every enemy on the screen. It's very expensive, that one, but it's quite useful. I think it would be cool if, for instance, you could find higher rarity or otherwise enchanted versions of those familiars. So, for instance, you may find a fire enchanted version of that familiar that changed the damage to fire damage, changed the sliding dash to like a flame tackle that lit everything around you on fire when you used it instead of stunning. Maybe it did a bit more damage as well in exchange for not having a stun. And it changed the overall like earthquake ability into like a fire eruption that had like fire pillars come out of enemies around you instead. Stuff like that. A lightning elemental version instead, maybe, that could give you like a much farther dash that cost a little bit more but paralyzed enemies in the way because you would like turn into a lightning bolt, and it changed the earthquake into like a chain lightning that erupted from all the enemies in the area. That kind of idea that gives you just some different stuff to look for. That way when you get a familiar, it isn't necessarily the same every time. I just think it would be kind of an interesting idea to have, you know, it's one of the main like flagship mechanics of the game, this whole familiar thing. It's where you get all of your active skills from. So it would be kind of cool if it meshed with the other systems in the game, having some sort of rarity or enchantment or something like that that altered the effects, gave them a bit more variety, made builds a bit different in terms of which familiars you got and when and that sort of thing. So that would be my suggestion, my idea. I have no idea if that is in any way in line with what the developers actually want to do, which is why it's only a suggestion, but I just think it would be kind of neat. Basically. As far as getting your own hands on it, I did mention that this is in a closed beta right now, so I will put 2 links in the description below this video. One of them will be just to the Steam page so that you can check it out or wishlist it or whatever you want to do, and the other one will be a link to the site that you can go to actually opt in or try to get into the closed beta. So if you actually want to try this out yourself, they are currently sending out their first few waves of invitation keys so that you can have a go at it, maybe have your own opinions and your own suggestions to give them. So if you want to actually try and get into this, just look down there in the links and you'll find a way to enter the closed beta yourself to see if you can get a key at some point as they send more of them out. So that is Crown Trick as it stands right now. I'm actually pretty excited for where this is going to go. I definitely look forward to what it's going to become as it actually gets towards its full release, and I'm definitely going to be covering it more when it's actually, you know, fully out, because it's rare to see really traditional roguelikes like this that have a sort of melding of also new mechanics. And I've been just a huge fan of roguelikes in general since I was a little kid, scrolling through BBSs to find new ones, so I'm always going to cover stuff like this because it really interests me. So that is the current state of Crown Trick and its closed beta. Check below if you want to try and get in yourself. Thank you guys very, very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.